In case any of you think that I'm making this video series because I'm a Mike Brown apologist, just know I was once a part of this. Welcome to the jungle, Bengals fans. I'm Kyle Phelps, and the last episode was really not very nice, honestly. My point in this whole video series is to show how Mike Brown deserves redemption, but honestly, like, the redemption wouldn't be necessary if it weren't for the first section of his career, and yeah, you wouldn't know that he deserves it if you're only paying attention to the mistakes he made in the 90s. So if you haven't watched that video, you're probably going to be, a little confused and not quite on the same page, so you should probably go ahead and watch that now. Like, I'll sit here and wait here. Just go ahead and click pause, and I'll be here when you get back, alright? Alright, we cool? Trust me, it gets much better than that. But before we dive in today, I'd just like to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the content. It really helps my channel grow, and it helps you know when all of my content comes out. So let's start by continuing a little bit of what we didn't get to last time. That's the new stadium.
It's a prime viewing spot for watching the implosion.
Now known as Paycor Stadium, but most Bengals fans know it as Paul Brown Stadium because that's what it's been called for the vast majority of the time. Today it's seen as the Bengals' home, a place where fans can go and, just enjoy being a fan and, get excited about the games and stuff like that, but it wasn't always seen in that positive of a light. The Bengals actually used to play at this other stadium called Riverfront Stadium, going all the way back to their first season in the NFL. It actually started construction in their first season back in the AFL in 1968. And there were some good memories there, to be sure, a lot of great memories from the Reds and some great memories from the Bengals.
Will the next person that sees anybody throw anything onto this field, point them out, or get them out of here? You don't live in Cleveland, you live in Cincinnati.
But it was also really outdated by 1996. There weren't any luxury seats for fans or anything like that, nothing that really generated a whole lot of revenue for the team. There was this awful turf there that was prone to inclement weather, along the Ohio River, and it had freezing problems and stuff like that. I mean, you can get upset at the way that the Bengals funded their new stadium and the way that they went about that whole process, but you really can't be upset with them feeling like they needed to upgrade from Riverfront Stadium, which by the time they got rid of it was just a disaster. Now, during most of this process, the Bengals were absolutely catastrophically awful for the vast majority of the time here. It is actually said that Paul Brown Stadium was the house that Blake built because during the voting for funding the new stadium that the actual public voters didn't actually get to participate in, it just happened to coincide with that one Shake and Blake season we talked about in the last video, where the hype for the Bengals was probably the highest it had been since that '88 Super Bowl run.
Let's go down to the jungle.
So partially due to the hype, and also very little transparency like I talked about with the city leaders agreeing to finance the stadium without a public vote, Mike Brown got his wish to fund the construction of the stadium with both an increase in sales tax and a tax on admissions and parking at the stadium. It was an incredible deal for the Bengals and the Brown family, and the revenue generated by keeping the Bengals was definitely an economic boost for the city. But I think most people agree that the Brown family still kind of made out like bandits in this deal. The stadium was finally ready in 2000, and the results on the field were still pretty awful. We talked about the Gus Frerotte and Dick LeBeau and that whole mess and everything like that in the last video, but I think ultimately that's kind of what led to an awakening for Mike, who at this point had done nothing but absolutely tarnish his father's legacy. In 2003, he took the first steps towards finally making a lick of damn sense, and that was the year that he hired Marvin Lewis. Now, a lot of people who are my age or younger, mostly younger, will primarily remember Marvin Lewis as the aging old relic who needed to be fired from the team years before they actually did in 2018. You could argue that it was a decade too late, honestly. But in 2003, he might have been the single most important person brought into the Bengals franchise ever. And yes, I'm including this guy. I could really do a whole whole video about how much of a game changer Marvin Lewis was for the Bengals early on. I actually might, at some point, come to think about it, but just for now, let's focus on Mike Brown and his legacy. Probably the biggest criticism of Mike at this time was his arrogance and absolute refusal to listen to anybody else when it came to running the Bengals. For over a decade at this point, Mike had already proven that he just doesn't have the same football intuition that his father had, and he still insisted on running the team the same way that Paul did. That is, until Marvin Lewis came around. Now, despite my current feelings about the man that I've expressed plenty on this channel, the Bengals absolutely struck gold with Carson Palmer in 2003. They paired him with guys like Chad Johnson, TJ Hushmanzada, Rudy Johnson. Those guys were already on the team, and they had the bones of an already very good offensive line that featured legends like Willie Anderson and Richie Bram. Marvin, being such a revered defensive mind at the time, was kind of like the perfect storm. Marv proved himself as a great coach with the pieces he had at the time, and over time I think Mike began to trust him with delegating personnel decisions that he once reserved exclusively for himself. The Bengals' culture started shifting, and in 2005, they finally ended the longest playoff drought in the NFL at the time. Remember guys, I'm 30, right? I was born in 1992. The Bengals' most recent playoff game at that point was a loss to the Los Angeles Raiders on January 13th, 1991. I wasn't even entirely sure at this point that the Bengals were even allowed to be in the playoffs because of the way that everything I'd seen growing up. I had literally never even seen them come all that close. So for them to make it in 2005 shows you how much Marvin Lewis just changed the culture in Cincinnati so drastically. And that right there, I think, is why Mike trusted him so much and why he let the man stay as head coach until 2018. Honestly, despite the fact that Marvin Lewis stuck around for like a half a decade longer than he deserved, I still think that he deserves a spot in the Ring of Honor like ASAP, guys. There were definitely some off years in there with the Bengals of the next 5 years or so, but they did make the playoffs again in 2009, and by this time, Mike was putting together a few community and charity initiatives through the Cincinnati Bengals Foundation to hopefully repair that really strained relationship between himself and the city. Now, during this time period, Marvin Lewis was really more of like a Bill Belichick type figure. I mean, not really quite with that level of success, but in the idea that he was kind of like a coach-GM hybrid type of thing. The calls for Mike to hire a real GM were growing louder and louder through all the inconsistent seasons, and the culture was definitely better, but there were definitely some big swings and misses that Bengals fans were really starting to get tired of. After a couple more down years after the big playoff run, fans were really starting to get fed up, and they were striking back. You think Mike Brown hatred is your ally. You merely adopted the hatred. I was born into it, molded by it. I was 16 years old when the Houday Revolution began, and I took to it like white on rice. I was tired of the losing, just like everybody else. Yeah, that playoff run in 2005, that was cool. We all love to fantasize about what could have been if Kimo von Oelhoffen hadn't turned to the dark side and injured Palmer's knee. But things were back to the bottom of the barrel again by 2008, and it was time for some real change, guys. We'll focus on that in the next video, but in case any of you think that I'm making this video series because I'm a Mike Brown apologist, just know I was once a part of this. Anyway, we'll leave things on that happy note for today, so let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll feature the best ones in my next video, like this one from Rich G, who had a pretty long comment, so in the interest of not reading it all out loud and taking up all that time, I'll just highlight the fact that he mentioned he was a kid in the 70s, and the last sentence, Mike's cheapness was never about paying players, but about running a professional organization that made players want to stay here. I mean, that's a big deal. That really is. Now, this video was meant to show how the culture kind of started to shift after the 90s, but frankly, we only just saw last year the team even open an indoor practice facility. The Bengals are still ranked pretty low to this day on quite a few of the really important categories according to the NFLPA. But Mike has slowly been giving up his power more and more over the years, and it all started with Marvin Lewis. Like I said, I don't know if one human being has ever made a bigger impact on this franchise than Marvin Lewis. Joe Burrow's close, Don't get me wrong, Joe Burrow is very close, and he's probably going to get the nod when he wins a Super Bowl here. But for now, nobody changed things for the better like Marvin Lewis did early on. But that's all I've got, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, y'all can always catch more of what I do at Kyle Phelps92 on Twitter, Facebook.com/ThePhelps, Butt Fumble Sports, the Battle of Ohio podcast on the Spot Pod Network, and right here if you subscribe. And by the way, one last little announcement before I go. I've actually been accepted to the University of Cincinnati, so I'll be going back for a second degree. I already got one back in the day from Ohio University, so I might literally be insane, guys. I don't know. But I'll be starting in the fall, so it shouldn't affect my ability to do live streams and game reactions, because that all takes place during the weekends, but it might cut into my ability to produce other videos, because a lot of the time I'm going to be spent doing classes and when I usually am spent making these videos, right? So content might be a little less consistent going forward for a little while. But I'm also going for applied media communications, so in the long run, hopefully it'll help with the overall quality of the content on this channel. So look forward to that. But anyway, till next time, I'll leave y'all, as always, with a hootie!